Just when Tieu thought the old wooden house was safe, her mother suddenly appeared at the door while disabled Hanh, the girl Trieu Khanh had taken in, was still lying weak inside. Sensing something was wrong, Trieu Khanh left his work and rushed home. But will he arrive before Tieu is tricked into opening the door? If this story touches your heart, please give me a sub and a comment so I know. After the accident, the old stone house no longer felt peaceful. Morning light came through the wooden window and touched the simple bed where Hanh was lying quietly. Her body was still weak because of her disability, and after falling on the muddy road, even a small movement made her tired. When she tried to sit up, Tieu quickly came to her side and gently held her arm. Trieu Khanh stood near the doorway, watching both of them with worry in his eyes. On the small wooden table, there was only a little rice, a few wild vegetables, and the medicine he had bought the day before. He knew Hanh needed better food and more medicine to recover, but the money in his pocket was almost gone. After a long silence, he picked up his old work bag and decided to go out for a day job. Before leaving, he knelt in front of Tieu and spoke gently but seriously. Hanh was still weak, so Tieu had to stay close to her. He reminded the girl to lock the door from the inside and not open it for anyone, no matter who called her name. Tieu nodded, but her eyes were full of worry. She did not want her father to leave after everything that had happened. Hanh looked at Trieu Khanh and tried to speak, but her voice was too soft. She only raised her hand a little, as if telling him not to worry. Trieu Khanh understood. He smiled at her, though his heart felt heavy. He told both of them that he would return as soon as he earned enough money to buy medicine, rice, and something warm for Hanh to eat. Then he stepped outside and waited until he heard Tieu slide the lock into place. The village road was still damp from rain. Trieu Khanh walked toward a nearby farm where people sometimes hired workers to carry wood, clear grass, or dig soil. His clothes were old and his hands were rough from many days of labor, but he did not complain. In his mind, he kept seeing Hanh lying pale on the bed, and Tieu standing beside her with frightened eyes. No matter how tired he became, he had to take care of them. Back at home, the house was quiet except for the birds outside and Han's slow breathing. Tieu tried to be brave. She wiped Han's face with a clean cloth, poured a little water into a cup, and helped her drink slowly. Han gave her a faint smile. She was grateful but also worried because Tieu was trying so hard to act strong even though she was still only a child. A short time later, someone appeared outside the yard. It was Tieu's mother. She stood near the fence with a small bundle of wild vegetables in her hand, looking around carefully before walking closer to the door. Her voice suddenly became sweet as she called Tieu's name. She said she had heard that Han was sick and had brought vegetables to help cook porridge. Inside the house, Tieu froze. She remembered exactly what her father had told her. Do not open the door. Do not trust anyone too quickly. But this was her mother, speaking softly outside as if she truly cared. Tieu looked at Han, unsure what to do. Han's expression changed at once. Her weak hand gripped the blanket, and she shook her head slowly, trying to warn Tieu not to go near the door. Outside, the woman kept calling. She said she only wanted to see her daughter for a moment. Then her words became sharper. She told Tieu that Trieu Khanh was too busy caring for Han now, and soon he would forget about his own daughter. She said if Tieu came with her, she would not have to live in a poor house and spend her days caring for someone sick. Those words made Tieu's face turn pale. Han struggled to sit up, but her body trembled. She reached toward Tieu, trying to stop her from being hurt by those words. Tieu stood in the room, torn between fear and confusion. Outside, the woman knocked again and asked her to open the door, just a little. At the farm, Trieu Khanh was carrying bundles of grass when he suddenly stopped. His chest felt tight. He remembered the look in Han's eyes before he left, and he remembered how many times Tieu's mother had tried to take advantage of the child. The more he thought about it, the more uneasy he became. Finally, he dropped the bundle, apologized to the owner, and ran back toward the house. When Trieu Khanh reached the small path leading back to the old wooden house, his heart was beating hard. The whole way home, he kept telling himself that maybe he was worrying too much. Maybe the girls were still inside. Maybe the door was still locked, and maybe nothing had happened. But as soon as he got close to the yard, he heard a familiar voice outside the door. Tieu's mother was standing near the wooden steps with a small bundle of wild vegetables in her hand. She looked as if she had come to help, but her eyes kept moving toward the lock. She called Tieu again and said she only wanted to give Han something fresh to cook into porridge. Her voice sounded kind, but there was pressure hidden inside it. Inside the house, Tieu stood with both hands on the wooden bar across the door. Her father's words were still clear in her mind. Lock the door, stay with Han, do not open for anyone. But hearing her mother outside made her heart shake. She wanted to be a good daughter. She wanted to believe that maybe this time her mother really cared. On the simple bed, Han saw everything. Her body was still weak from the accident, and because of her disability, even sitting up took great effort. Still, she pushed herself up with trembling arms and tried to reach for Tieu. Her face was pale, but her eyes were full of warning. She could not speak loudly, so she shook her head, begging Tieu not to open the door. Outside, the woman's tone changed. She told Tieu that Trieu Khanh was only thinking about Han now. She said he had gone to work because he needed money for Han's medicine, and soon Tieu would become the one left behind. Then she said if Tieu came with her, she would not have to care for a sick girl every day. Those words hurt Tieu. Her eyes filled with tears, and her hand moved toward the lock. At that moment, Han forced herself off the bed. She nearly fell, but she grabbed the table and reached out to pull Tieu's sleeve. The movement was weak, but it was enough. Tieu turned around and saw Han shaking. Before Tieu could answer, Trieu Khanh rushed into the yard. His shirt was wet with sweat, and his hands were still dirty from work. When Tieu's mother saw him, she quickly lifted the vegetables and acted surprised. She said she only came because she heard Han was sick. She claimed she wanted to take Tieu up the mountain to pick more vegetables. Trieu Khanh did not shout right away. He walked to the door and called Tieu's name. Only after hearing his voice did the little girl remove the wooden bar and open the door. The moment he stepped inside, he saw Han leaning against the table, barely able to stand. He hurried to support her and helped her back onto the bed. Tieu stood beside them, crying quietly. Trieu Khanh wiped the tears from Tieu's face. He told her she did well by keeping the door locked. Then he turned toward her mother. His voice was calm, but his eyes were firm. He said Han needed rest and Tieu needed peace. If anyone truly wanted to help, they could wait for him to return instead of pressuring a child. The woman tried to argue. She said Tieu was her daughter and no one could stop a mother from seeing her child. But Tieu stepped closer to Trieu Khanh and held his shirt. In a small voice, she said she wanted to stay home because Han was sick and because her father had told her to be careful. Han heard those words and turned her face away, crying. After Tieu's mother left, the old wooden house became quiet again. But Trieu Khanh knew the danger had not disappeared. He looked at the weak wooden door, the low fence, and the path leading straight into the yard. Words were no longer enough. That afternoon, he gathered old planks, bamboo poles, rope, and nails. He began building a stronger gate in front of the house. Tieu stayed close and passed him each piece of wood. Han sat near the doorway, wrapped in a thin blanket, watching with grateful eyes. Every hammer strike sounded like a promise. Trieu Khanh was not only building a gate, he was building a line no one could cross easily again. By sunset, the new wooden gate stood in front of the small house, simple and rough, but strong enough to make the two girls feel safe. After Han's accident, the old wooden house becomes filled with worry, because Han is disabled and still very weak. Trieu Khanh leaves for work to earn money for her medicine and food, carefully warning Tieu to lock the door and never open it for anyone. While he is away, Tieu's mother arrives with wild vegetables, pretending to care about Han. But behind her gentle voice, she tries to make Tieu doubt her father and come away with her. Han, though exhausted, notices the danger and silently warns Tieu not to unlock the door. Feeling uneasy at work, Trieu Khanh rushes home and finds the truth. He protects both girls, sends the woman away, and begins building a stronger wooden gate to keep his fragile family safe before night falls, giving Tieu and Han hope today.